Myth 1. Vincent van Gogh cut off his entire ear. On December 23, 1888, in the town of Arles in the south of France, Paul Gauguin told Vincent van Gogh he was leaving. They had been living together in a small yellow house for 9 weeks, trying to build what Van Gogh called a studio of the South, a place where painters could live and work together and change what art was. Van Gogh had spent money he didn't have on 2 beds, on sunflowers painted on every wall, on months of letters begging Gauguin to come. When Gauguin said he was done, Van Gogh chased him into the street with a straight razor. Gauguin stared him down. Van Gogh took that razor and cut his ear. He wrapped the piece in paper. He walked to a brothel nearby and handed it to a woman named Rachel, telling her to keep this object carefully. Then he walked home and collapsed. But here's what everyone gets wrong. It wasn't his whole ear. It was just the lower lobe. The wound was serious enough to send him to hospital, but not serious enough to remove the entire structure. Every painting, every movie, every Halloween costume shows a bandage covering the whole side of his head. The self-portrait he painted afterward shows a bandage over just the lower ear. Myth 2. Isaac Newton discovered gravity when an apple hit his head. In 1666, a plague was killing people in Cambridge faster than anyone could bury them. Isaac Newton, 23 years old, fled to his mother's farmhouse in Woolsthorpe, where he sat in an orchard. He watched an apple fall from a tree, and according to every textbook you've ever read, it hit him in the head, and the idea of gravity struck him in the same instant. That didn't happen. The real story actually comes from Newton's friend William Stukeley, who wrote it down after a dinner conversation with Newton. What Stukeley actually wrote was this. Newton was sitting under an apple tree in a contemplative mood, and he watched an apple fall to the ground. That's it. Just a man staring at a piece of fruit and asking himself why it went down instead of sideways. The head-hitting detail was invented somewhere between 1666 and today by people who needed the story to be more dramatic than it actually was. Myth 3. Christopher Columbus discovered America. In the year 1000 AD, a Viking named Leif Erikson sailed west from Greenland with a crew of 35 men and no map. His father was Eric the Red, a man who had been banished from Norway for manslaughter, then banished from Iceland for murder, and responded both times by sailing further west and founding new settlements. Leif grew up watching his father treat exile as a business opportunity. So when a Norse sailor came back from a voyage saying he'd spotted unknown land to the west but hadn't bothered to stop, Leif bought his boat and retraced the route in reverse. He hit 3 separate landmasses. The first was nothing but rocks and glaciers. The second had forests. The third, which he named Vinland, had wild grapes, salmon rivers, and mild enough weather to spend the winter. He built a settlement, loaded his ship with timber and grapes, and sailed home. In 1960, Norwegian archaeologist Helge Ingstad and his wife Anne dug up that settlement on the northern tip of Newfoundland, Canada. 9 Norse structures, an iron smelting furnace, a boat repair yard. Columbus landed in the Bahamas in 1492, and Columbus never set foot on the North American mainland. He landed in the Caribbean 4 times and died believing he'd reached Asia. Leif Erikson was in Canada almost 5 centuries before Columbus left Spain. Myth 4. Vikings wore horned helmets. There is exactly 1 Viking helmet that has ever been found with horns on it. It was discovered in Denmark in 1868. Archaeologists dated it to approximately 900 BC, roughly 1,800 years before the Viking Age began. Every other Viking helmet ever found is a simple iron cap designed to protect a head from a sword, not designed to have 2 large horns on the sides that would catch every blade and turn your head into a lever. The horned image came from 19th century Romanticism, specifically from costume design for a 1876 opera production by Richard Wagner. The costume designer, Carl Emil Doppler, put horns on the Norse characters. The actual Vikings were raiding and trading across Europe for 300 years, from around 793 to 1066 AD. They were navigators, merchants, settlers, and warriors. The horns existed in 1 ceremonial artifact from a civilization that predated them by almost 2 millennia. The only horned helmet in Viking history is sitting quietly in Denmark, having nothing to do with any of this. Myth 5. Napoleon Bonaparte was extremely short. In 1803, the British government put a cartoonist on their payroll, and his job was to make the most feared military commander in Europe look like a joke. And he did it by drawing Napoleon as a tiny child throwing tantrums in rooms full of furniture 3 times his size. The cartoon was called Maniac Ravings. Napoleon is pictured stomping on chairs, screaming about the British Parliament, wearing a hat so enormous it swallows his face. It spread across Britain, then across Europe. Napoleon was 5 feet 2 inches tall according to French measurements. French inches at the time were longer than British inches. Converted correctly, that puts him at 5 feet 7, which was average for a Frenchman in the early 1800s. His own imperial guard had a minimum height requirement of 5 feet 10, which meant he was usually photographed and painted surrounded by people significantly taller than him. That did not help. Myth 6. The Great Wall of China is visible from space, more than 200 years before any human had been to space. An English antiquarian named William Stukeley wrote in a letter that the Chinese wall may be discerned at the moon. In 1932, Ripley's Believe It or Not repeated a version of the claim and printed it for millions of readers. By the time actual astronauts existed, the idea was already so embedded in public knowledge that nobody thought to check it. In October 2003, China launched its first crewed space mission. The astronaut was Yang Liwei. He orbited Earth 14 times over 21 hours. When he landed, a reporter from China Central Television asked him directly, "Did you see the Great Wall?" Yang said, "The Earth looked very beautiful from space, but I did not see our Great Wall." The Chinese Ministry of Education ordered its elementary school textbooks, which had been teaching this as fact for years, to be revised. The claim was quietly removed. The reason the wall isn't visible isn't because it's not long enough. It's because it's not wide enough. The wall averages about 15 to 30 feet wide. From low Earth orbit, the human eye can't resolve anything narrower than a few hundred feet without optical aid. Cities are visible because they light up at night. Highways are visible because they contrast against their surroundings. Myth 7. The Salem witches were burned at the stake. In 1692, in the town of Salem, Massachusetts, more than 200 people were accused of witchcraft. 30 were found guilty. 20 were executed. 19 were hanged from a tree on a hill called Proctor's Ledge. The method wasn't clean. They climbed a ladder, had a rope put around their neck, and the ladder was pulled away. One man, Giles Corey, refused to enter a plea. The court's response was to lay him on the ground and pile heavy stones on his chest over the course of 2 days until he died. He was 80 years old. The burning myth comes from Europe. Across Germany, France, Scotland, and Scandinavia, historians estimate roughly 50,000 people were executed as witches between the 15th and 18th centuries. Many of them burned. That image crossed the Atlantic and attached itself to Salem, where it had never happened. The governor of Massachusetts shut the whole thing down in 1693. The reason? His wife started getting mentioned as a possible witch. Myth 8. Albert Einstein failed math. In 1895, a 16-year-old Albert Einstein sat the entrance exam for the Federal Polytechnic School in Zurich, Switzerland. He failed. Every motivational poster, every teacher who's ever told a struggling student, even Einstein failed, they're all pointing at this moment. What they leave out is what he actually failed. He failed French, he failed geography, he failed botany. He was 16 sitting an exam designed for 18-year-olds, and the only sections that beat him were the ones that had nothing to do with numbers or science. He retook the exam the following year, passed with a score of 5.5 out of 6, enrolled at the Polytechnic in 1896. His school records from before that exam tell the same story. At the Luitpold Gymnasium in Munich, he consistently received top marks in mathematics and physics. His report card from the Aargau Cantonal School, the year after the failed exam, reads, "In mathematics, he is well versed in all branches and shows outstanding independence." Einstein himself was asked about this myth directly. He said, "I never failed in mathematics. The myth exists because it's a better story."